Hey guys, just want to make a video reaffirming the restoration of all things due to the hundreds of passages in the Old Testament that are clear and unambiguous, which Christ did not come to change but to fulfill. Um, Talk about a couple of things here about uh, preterism in general, and one thing that keeps coming up apparently is certain people get a pass to break the law in between 40 and 70 AD. That's just not found in the scripture. And remember, we did this video with the definitions of exegesis and eisegesis. And exegesis is when you determine what a text means based on what it's saying. And eisegesis is how to make text fit your belief. Um, and I think preterists are, quite frankly, terrible with that. But this already but not yet type stuff, it doesn't get you out of the problem with Paul at all, not at all. And like I said, there's just no biblical text that give him a right. And remember, if the contention is that until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot nor tittle, it's very simple. Did Christ mean what he said or not? There's no exception in that rule if that's how you take it. And I would contend to you that they have a terrible understanding of all things being renewed. Okay, this old covenant, new covenant dichotomy, it's a renewed covenant. This earth passing away, it doesn't mean earth is going to be completely blown into a million pieces. It means it's going to be renewed. The old way of things is renewed. And so we're not, and that's what Jesus was saying, heaven and earth would pass away. And I don't know. It's just something that doesn't make any sense to me to go down this track. But I want to talk a little bit about Paul anyway, and this being alive and their lifetime and stuff. You got to remember when Paul talked about, he said, "We who still remain will be called we." That means Paul too. So even in your own model, Paul is mistaken because he said we who remain. It's not just we, like we will be gathered. No, he says we who remain alive. Paul fully expected to be alive. He expected to see the Perusia for some time, but I think he changed his opinion on that. And that is something that preterists don't allow for, because it's a very it's almost juvenile. They pick the text they want, and like I said this from the beginning, dealing with all the biblical text is much more time consuming than dealing with the ones you want to deal with. You know, in my opinion, they're terrible at it. You know, go back and watch my video in Isaiah 65, Romans 8:28. They don't take much into account except what they want to see, apparently. But I'm going to talk a little bit about Paul and read some stuff. And scholars are hip to this too. Scholars know that Paul had changed his mind on certain things as time went on. And I suspect they all were waiting for the end to come. I suspect that was a common belief. They were waiting because they knew Jesus and they understood him a certain way, and they figured just because he's here, this has to be coming soon. This has to be coming. Well, let's talk a little bit about Paul then. Romans 9:11 may be compared to 2 Thessalonians 2:3-12. It seems that in the latter, there is a somewhat pessimistic picture of events due to take place before Christ's return. Life will get more difficult, a rebellion will take place, and a lawless one will be revealed, who will engage in various wicked acts and deceptions before Christ destroys him. However, in Romans 9-11, there is a rather more optimistic picture of events before the Perusia. This is a positive view of the number of people who have received salvation, and in particular, Israel's rejection of her Messiah is not final. and indeed all Israel will be saved. It would seem that in 1 Thessalonians 4:15 through 17 and 1 Corinthians 15:51 through 52, Paul expected the parousia to come quickly, so quickly that it would take place before his death. In 1 Thessalonians 4:15, 1 through 7, 15 through 17, Paul twice uses the expression, "we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord," which may be taken to mean we Christians who survive until the parousia. A similar idea may be seen at 1 Corinthians 15:51, where the "we" that is emphasized in verse 52b indicates that Paul placed himself among the survivors at the parousia. So Paul places himself in this category, and that is true. Without a doubt, that is true. We, just like the preterist likes to say, this generation, right? Well, when you say we, you're including yourself. So even in your own model, Paul believed he would be alive to see 70 AD, and he didn't. Let's be clear about this. However, in Paul's later epistles, it seems that he no longer expected to be alive at the second coming of Christ, but rather to die before it took place. Verses such as 2 Corinthians 4:12, "Death is at work in us, but life in you," 5:1 and 8, are said to reflect this way of thinking, as well as Philippians 1:21 and 23, where Paul speaks of dying as gain and of his desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. So now the apostle considers death before the parousia to be a real possibility, a perspective he did not seem to have prior to 2 Corinthians, and he now thinks the parousia will take longer in the approximate future. What else did I want to touch on? I also wanted to touch on the marriage thing as well, because he changes his view on that. I'll go on. He says some other things. In 1 Thessalonians 5:1 through 10, it seems that the parousia will come suddenly and unexpectedly, like a thief in the night. Whereas in 2 Thessalonians 2:1 through 12, it is clear that certain events have to take place before Christ returns. It seems clear that resurrection is a future event in 1 Corinthians 15:51 through 54, Thessalonians 4:14 through 16, and Romans 6:4, Colossians 3:1 through 4, however, seems to talk about the resurrection as an event that has taken place in the believers' lives. You have been raised with Christ, you have died, and your life is hidden in Christ and God, with Christ and God. Is there at least a different perspective on the resurrection in this later stage of Paul's life? If one is prepared to actually I'll skip over that too. As far as the state is concerned, in 1 Corinthians 6:1 through 11, Paul is comparatively negative, has a negative view of the state, particularly the law courts, as advised in Corinthians to have little to do with them. However, in Romans 13:1 through 7, representing a later stage in Paul's thinking, Paul is rather more positive in his evaluation of the state. All are too subject to the governing authorities which have been instituted by God and are his servants. As far as marriage is concerned, okay, I've heard this drum beat on a couple times and the freaking verse kept escaping my mind, but listen very carefully to this, okay? As far as marriage is concerned, 1 Corinthians 7 seems to have some reservations about its value. See verses 28, 29, 33 through 34. Not least because at this stage, Paul believed the parousia was near, verses 29 and 31. But in Ephesians 5:22, the institution of marriage is compared to that of Christ and his church, a high comparison. Thus, Paul has at least changed his thinking on these matters. Doubt is also of the opinion that Paul changed his mind on the time the believer receives the resurrection body. If it is the case that Paul developed in his thinking on these matters, then it is obvious question as why this took place. Well, I won't waste any more time with this because I do want to cover some other things. But this is something that is clear about Paul. he evolved, and what he knew, and think about it, no one knew the day or the hour. They just knew his season. And Paul assumed he was in the season for a time. And as time went on, I think he started to realize and learn other things. And what the preterist does is puts Paul in a static model and then forgets all the other verses that contradict what he's saying. Forget the fact that Thessalonians uses the word for air, atmosphere, not the word for heaven. He uses the word air. And the word for heaven can mean atmosphere or upper atmosphere as well. So, but in any case, Paul takes that possibility away from you that anyone is snatched off to heaven. That's not what it says. It says they're going to be snatched up physically in the cloud. The Shekinah glory is going to appear again, apparently. So, to make Paul consistent, you either have to accept the fact that he learned as he went along, or you have to accept the fact that you have a static model and it contradicts itself. The later writings of Paul, he doesn't expect to be alive at the Perusia, or the Parousia, but he earlier on he definitely expected to be alive. Definitely expected to be alive at the Parousia. Okay, and that's why he said we. You can't take Paul out of that statement. He said we. And he didn't say them. He didn't say, when you just look at it. And as far as this doing away with the law thing, I think people should remember one thing. They should, everybody likes to say the word law. Well, remember, Torah means guidance and teaching. And if you believe that God threw out his guidance and teaching, I would say you are mistaken. Now, I'm not going to get into debates over particular commandments or anything else, but what I'm saying is, if you think the Torah has been thrown away and not useful, it doesn't make any sense. Why would God throw away his teaching and guidance to us? So that too does not make any sense. It is clear that James in his letter is speaking about works, and the works are the works of the law, the works of Torah. And I think people have a very twisted understanding of that. But be that as it may, if you're going to take up the jots and tittle argument, you have to be consistent. Because if you're going to say that we can't, if you're going to say that people today in a futurist type view are under the law because Jesus said, I could just, like I said, you can use the Paul excuse. Well, we're in the birth pains. The new king, the Perusia, hasn't come yet. So, it's ridiculous. And to think that all the statements in the Old Testament that talk about his teachings being good forever. I mean, when you read the Psalms, those words are good and they're just and they're meant for the growth of people. And I don't recall any place where Jesus said the Torah itself would be done away with. Okay, we got to think about this. The Torah means guidance and teaching. It's there for our benefit. Penalties and all, so you can talk about all that other stuff, but like I said, to give Paul a card, a freebie card, and even Peter in some cases, is it's just not consistent exegesis. There's nothing in the text that says Paul gets a pass. Okay, nothing. It's just you saying this has to be true, and there's no reason to believe it. And we'll talk about Genesis 8 now, 8:22. While the earth remains, okay, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Okay, so Genesis says as long as the earth remains, all these things will keep going. Now remember, in preterism, science has already finished this argument. This is not a dispute. The earth and everything along with us is going to actually physically fall apart if it's not destroyed by something else. When the sun goes nova, it destroy the earth, and eventually. So I just remember that the earth in the preterist model has to die at some point. It is not eternal. And if you doubt that, you really need to consult science and look at things and how they're breaking down and dying and all this other stuff. The whole universe is doing this. But this passage says, while the earth remains, okay, so as long as the earth is here, There'll be seed times and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Well, Ecclesiastes 1:4 says, a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Okay? So Genesis 8 says, as long as the earth is here, we will have all these seasons taking place and weather cycles. And Ecclesiastes says the earth will remain forever. Okay, so here you are back again at Jesus saying heaven and earth shall pass away. Now what they're going to try and do is use this as a covenant term. And this covenant term, it's a lot trickier than they want to pretend it is. But to apply that to creation, the creation has to be renewed. When Israel was renewed, the creation was going to be renewed. Okay? I don't know what's so hard to understand about this. Well, I do actually, because of the glip attitude that people have. Well, now I want to, so yeah, I pointed out that Paul's changing, his thinking evolved as he went along. I think that's pretty well attested to in his own writings, just exegeting his own writings. But when you eisegete them and you force them all to say the same thing when they don't, then that's when you have a problem. We also see that the earth will remain forever. Well, in the preterist model, that's not true. Neither are the weather cycles, because you and I both know when the sun goes nova, when it burns up its fuel, these weather cycles will cease. Okay, so this is a pretty stiff thing now. This is kind of calling God a liar. But I want to get to Revelations 20, go past 1,000 years, the defeat of Satan. I just want to point out something to you guys and let you think about this. Starting at Revelation 20, verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. From his presence, the earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were open. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in those books, according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Okay? This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Now remember, the preterist mind, this happened in 70 AD. Okay, this right here. In the 1,000-year reign, they really believe that, forget it just boggles the mind. All flesh would be destroyed if someone didn't stop it. You got wars that have killed 60 million people. 60 million. And even that was not a war that would have destroyed all of mankind if God didn't cut it short. So that's ridiculous. But look what it says. Okay? It says, then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. So death and the grave were thrown into the lake of fire. Okay, well, death only applies to one thing, and that's human people, first of all. And I'm giving up the dead. Actually, I'm going to keep on going. I don't want to get sidetracked right here. And anyone's name was not found, then it was thrown into the lake of fire. Okay, so this happened in 70 AD. Then I saw the new heaven and new earth, for the first heaven and first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God. Okay, coming down from God. And they're going to say this is us. Prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. Okay? Now, clearly, if you just read this with some common sense, whatever this temple is coming down, this invisible spiritual temple that never happened, New Jerusalem, it comes down, and when it comes down among men, okay, because you can't have it in heaven. You can't have something coming down from heaven to heaven, right? So it comes out of earth. It says there'll be no more death. Well, that didn't happen. No more mourning. That didn't happen. No crying. No pain. Okay, these things are all still present with us today, for the former things have passed away. They're going to say it's the covenant. It's not the covenant. Okay, what they're talking about here is the renewing of all creation. And he who was seated on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. All things. Okay, so seems like the same old rock here. Also, he said, write this down. These words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will give the spring of water of life without payment. To the one who conquers will have his heritage. And I will be his God, and he will be my son. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for the murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, have their portion in a lake of fire which burns with sulfur, which is the second death. Then come one of the seven angels who had seven bowls filled with the last plague, and spoke to me, saying, come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the spirit of a great high mountain, and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. Out of heaven from God to man, remember that. Having the glory of God, its radiance was like a most rare jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. It had a great high wall, 12 gates, and at the 12 gates, angels on the gates, and the names of the 12 tribes and the sons of Israel were inscribed. And on the east gates, on the north 3 gates, and on the south 3 gates, and the west 3 gates, the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And the one who spoke with me had a measuring rod of gold, and measured the city and its walls, the city foursquare in length and the width. And he measured the city with his rods, 12,000 stadia. Its length and width were height are equal, and it was measured the wall 144 cubits by human measurement, which is also an angel's measurement. The wall was built of jasper, with the city like pure gold, like clear glass. The fountains of the wall were adorned, and it goes on with the city description. And this is what trips people up. And I saw no temple in the city, for its temple was the Lord God and the Lamb Almighty. And the city has no need for a sun or a moon to shine in it. For the glory of God gives its light to the lamp. The lamp is the Lamb, but the light, by its light, the nations will walk, and the kings of the earth will bring glory into it. What, into heaven, I guess. And its gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. They will bring into it glory and honor of the nations, and nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who does detestable and false, those who are not written in the Lamb's book of life. Then it goes to show the river of life. Then the angel showed me the river of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, through the middle of the street. The river is a tree, 12 kinds of fruit. It goes on, and then it goes into Jesus is coming, and he tells you, behold, I'm coming soon. You know what you don't see here? You know what you have to purely read into the text? Is that there's anybody getting into heaven after the judgment. It's just not there. You read Revelations, read it. Read 19, 20, 21, and 22. You'll see that it's a process that culminates in a singular event. There's nobody else that comes after. Okay, all this talk about nothing entering the walls that are unjust and all this stuff. It's just a statement reiterating what the judgment actually did. There is no more unrighteous people after the judgment. There is no more. That's it. You read it and you tell yourself if that seems like a singular event. It's not an ongoing event. There is nothing in Revelations about an ongoing resurrection. Nothing. It's pure eisegesis and imagination reading it into the text. There's absolutely nothing in the book of Revelation that gives you any kind of evidence for an ongoing resurrection. It's a singular event. If it happened in 70 AD, we're all just screwed. We're just people on the outside looking in, waiting to die. Because there is no circumstance put aside for anyone to get in anything after the books have been opened. Once they've been opened, people are judged, and then they're closed. It's pretty simple. There is no evidence whatsoever for an ongoing resurrection. Completely fictional, made up, read into the text, unbiblical, false, lying. I mean, it's a joke. It's not there. No exegesis scholar can find it. I looked. It's non-existent. Completely made up. So I wanted to go over those things. Paul can change his mind, and he did, and you can prove it with the text. The earth is always going to remain. There's always going to be seasons and agriculture and things. That does not happen in the preterist model. This earth will die. It will cease to exist at some point, making the Old Testament out to lie. Yeah, the Torah, it's foolish to think that God got rid of his guidance and instruction to us, okay? And as far as getting rid of the law, as people want to call it, Paul doesn't get a pass. There's nowhere in Scripture that lets this happen, okay? Nowhere. Nowhere. And 4, read Revelation. There is no evidence whatsoever of any type of ongoing resurrection of people from the dead. Okay? It's pure eisegesis. There is no record of any extra bodies going into heaven after the judgment. You read it, it's portrayed as a very singular event. It happens, and that's it. And then you have the aftermath. It's a singular event that affects all people at one time. Okay, and like I said, this nonsense with Paul and you being snatched, and there's no other part of you to snatch. Okay, there's nothing of yours to take. What, did your soul go to heaven then in 70 A.D.? Were their souls caught up and taken into heaven? A soul without a body? I mean, it's ridiculous. When you really stop to think about it, it's ridiculous. There's nothing to snatch. The only thing one could snatch is you itself, you. And remember, the words there, the words. He uses the word for atmosphere, not the word for heaven, which can still mean atmosphere. He uses a word that specifically denotes the air around a person. The language does not allow for anything other than a physical. It says you are going to be taken against your will. You're going to be snatched into the physical air in the sky, where you will probably be enveloped by that cloud, which is probably the Shekinah glory. I can't, just literally prove that from the text, but what I can prove is you're taken into the air, and it's a you. Up until that point, there is no teaching of two yous existing in one body. And then what would happen? Like I said, people's souls were sucked out of their bodies in 70 A.D., and they're walking around without souls now. It's just ignorant. It's ignorant. They dodge so many things, and I don't know. I'm not even going to talk about it anymore. That's it for this video. God bless.